Radical acceptance. Why not let it go if you can't control it? This is the exact question I want you to answer by the end of this video. Throughout this video, I'll guide you through what lack of acceptance generally looks like. Where does that need to control that's really intrinsic for the human experience come from? What we can and what we can control, so that by the end of that video you can have the answer that you are looking for. Hey there my friend, I am Danny from the Higher Consciousness channel, and I'm here to help you expand your awareness and trick you into life of higher consciousness. Now, most likely you have catched yourself thinking similar thoughts, haven't you? Something in the lines of, if only I knew that earlier. If I knew that earlier, I wouldn't have made that stupid decision. I wouldn't have lost the love of my life. We wouldn't have had to break up with that beautiful girl I loved. Or I shouldn't have done that. This was the most stupid mistake. If only I knew that lesson before. This is how we are trying to control what has happened to us in the past, don't we? Don't you catch yourself doing that sometimes? Or maybe, no, they shouldn't have left me. They shouldn't have. If I were a better person, if I treated them better, that wouldn't have had to happen. And we would have been together, living happily ever after. Or maybe, how could I miss the bus? Now I'll make everyone at work angry, and it will all fall onto me. I'll be the victim. I'll be the one who get all the judgments and all the criticism. This is how a lot of times we try to control things that have already happened, or things that we generally don't have ultimate control over. And so the real question that inevitably pops up in our mind, if that's the case, and if we acknowledge ourselves doing that, the real question is, where does that need to control come from? Have you ever asked that yourself? Because it's a really curious question, isn't it? Where does the need for control come from? Now, if we investigate, if we look into it for a moment, what we'll find out, and this is another question actually that I want to ask you. Do you think that the need to control comes from showing your organizational abilities, showing how rational you are to deal with the circumstances in your life, and showing how responsible of a person you are, that you can deal even with the hardest of situations? Is that where the need to control come from? Or does the need to control sometimes come from unchecked anxiety, distress, and lack of self-reliance? Reliance on that self, the self that I am, that deals with all kinds of different situations in life. So everything that you're prepared of or that you're not prepared of, what if you could rely on yourself to handle it? Wouldn't that feel amazing? Wouldn't that give you a lot of freedom? Interesting, isn't it? Because if we look deeper now, if we inquire deeper, if we could rely on ourselves ultimately, in our ability to deal with whatever is coming up in front of us, whatever life brings to us, then would we have that incessant, intrusive need to control with all the anxiety, distress, worry, and disappointments that come from it? Would we need that? Well, let's look at what are some of the things we can't control, and then also explore what we can really control, what is under our ultimate control. Because I believe that if we can distinguish between those two, the things we can't and it can control, then it will be easy to answer that question. Why not let go of it if you can't control it? Why would you make your life harder? Curious, isn't it? So, going back to the topic, circumstances and situations, do you think that they are under your absolute control? Now, of course, you have control over your actions, of how you respond to situations, how you see them, but do you have ultimate control over the situations happening in your life? Do you have ultimate control over your work environment in the place you work, with your colleagues, for example? Do you have ultimate control of how your family members treat you when you go to meet them on that holiday that they invited you to? Do you have ultimate control over whether the bus will get on time or it will be delayed a little bit? Well, you don't, right? You don't. So what do you have control over if it's not circumstances and situations? You always have control, because that's always in your awareness, of your emotional reactions and feelings. And now we could inquire deeper. Where do our emotional reactions and feelings come from? We will get to that in a moment, but let's look at what we can control. We can't control people and their opinions. And just think of how much time all of us has spent in our lives trying to control how much people like us, whether they validate us or not, whether they understand us or not. I know this for myself because this was one of the biggest challenges in my life, the fear of being misunderstood. And I always try to prove a point instead of just explaining what I know and then not trying to convince anybody of anything. This video maybe is another example of that, actually. I'll find out when I'm editing it, funnily enough. So we don't have ultimate control over people and their opinions. Just think of it for a moment. Would you like somebody else to have control over your opinion of others? Because it's inevitably happening. All of us try to do that. But the question here is that productive? Does that give us a sense of freedom? Or does it come with a burden that we have to carry on our back? Because if you don't want to control for a moment, assume that you are able to let go of how you want other people to see you, their opinions of you, then you would also accept that the only opinion that really matters is the opinion you have of your own self, which goes back to what you can control. You can control your attitude when you relate to others and your own perceptions of yourself, your own perceptions of other people and how they treat you. This is directly under your control. It's literally right in front of your eyes, always, right in front of your vision. While the people and their opinion is so distant that you don't have ultimate control over it. And if you stress so much about that, well, you're just making your life harder, don't you? And I'm not blaming you by saying that. This is a mistake that all of us inevitably do. And going back to the question I want you to answer, is that worth it? Why not let go? If you can't control it, why not let go of what you can control? Wouldn't that make your life easier? Now, the last thing is the outcome from our efforts. Imagine it like that. You have a goal, you have a vision that you're pursuing, and then you're doing whatever you need to do to get there. And you're obviously hoping that you should get a certain outcome. As I'm doing the same while I'm making this video and I'll be uploading it to YouTube. I hope that I will get a certain outcome, but the outcomes from our efforts, our best efforts, is not ultimately under our control. Yet what is under our control? It's our inner dialogue and the self-concept, how we see ourselves following through that action that we needed to do. This is directly under our control. How do you perceive yourself? How do you talk to yourself? Whether you congratulate yourself, whether you say to yourself you did a great job, whether you blame yourself or criticize yourself or try to find all the faults, this is directly under your control. The inner dialogue you have with yourself whenever you have embarked on doing some form of action, or you have made some form of decision and then you face the consequences of that decision. The inner dialogue is under your control. The consequences, not necessarily, not ultimately. So With that distinction, I really hope, genuinely hope, that you have a greater awareness of what makes your life hard. I actually tried to explain it with this simple illustration here, which I believe will make it a little bit easier. We're talking about radical acceptance. So it's only natural to ask the question, what are the benefits of radical acceptance? And the benefits that I found out is that it leads to self-empowerment, acceptance, and reliance on who we are. This is the purpose of radical acceptance. The more we can accept what we can't control, the greater freedom and ability this gives us to control what we can, to shift our attention to what we have control over. So instead of, if we look at those ugly images here, instead of controlling people, circumstances, this is what this house means, and the outcome of our efforts, this car, I want to get somewhere, something happens, there is traffic, so on and so forth. Instead of controlling that, if we shift our attention through radical self-acceptance, through radical acceptance of what I don't have control over, which is simply the answer to the question, what am I trying to control that I'm not certain I can control? And the more awareness you bring to that, the more you can let that go, which naturally shifts your attention. If you imagine that circle, inner circle as your attention, it expands so that it reaches now the outer periphery of what's under your control, which is at all cases your inner world. Again, your emotional reactions and feelings, your attitude and perceptions, and your inner dialogue and self-concept. All of that is under your control. And paradoxically enough, funnily enough, it then gives you indirect control to what you want to control, but you can't. That's the funny paradox. So this is why the purpose of radical acceptance is self-empowerment, acceptance, and self-reliance. You become more internally self-confident without having to rely on anything external, which is really, really amazing and beautiful. And by that time in the video, you most likely have asked the question, okay, Danny, all of this is fucking fascinating and beautiful. Now, how can I practice that radical acceptance? And now, I cannot say I'm an expert in that. I am a student in radical self-acceptance, but I've come to find out that there are a couple of questions we can ask ourselves consistently whenever we feel stiff, whenever we feel resistant, anxious, and really nervous and trying to really grasp a certain outcome and try to control it, see everything we can do to ensure that it happens the way we want it to. Whenever we feel like that, there are a couple of questions we can ask ourselves so that we can make ourselves feel better, reach that state of self-acceptance, empowerment, and reliance on who I am. Just consider for a moment how acceptance inevitably neutralizes emotions that drive your need for control, which emotions then create this incessant disruptive thoughts that create a lot of internal stress. So consider that for a moment, the power of acceptance in neutralizing your feelings. Because if that's the case, then maybe these questions will help you through the process. Maybe you can ask yourself, if you want to make that practical, what and who are you trying to control? What circumstances and who, people, whom of the people in your life are you trying to control? And then if you get an answer, you can inquire deeper, investigate deeper. Why? What does that do for you? How does it help you? Does it give you a sense of security? Does it give you a sense of having greater influence over others, which then makes you more confident in yourself? And all of these are valid answers. There is nothing wrong. Actually, by doing that self-inquiry, investigation, asking these questions, you might find out that some of the answers are really egocentrical, and that's okay. because this is your ego at play, isn't it? And the more you understand your ego, the more your awareness expands. So that's a beautiful process. And the next question maybe you can ask yourself is, what scares you about letting that control over another or over a circumstance go? What scares you about letting that control go? What is the worst case scenario that you don't want to face, that you are trying to escape? These questions, they can open the doors to what remains hidden out of view deep in your emotional body. Because when we are trying to control, we are repressing our feelings. And now, radical acceptance is not a form of repression. It's not a form of wearing some rose-colored glasses. And it's not a form of escaping responsibility. No. Radical acceptance helps you accept yourself for who you are instead of being critical, judgmental, and condemnating. Helps you empower yourself and then have the ability to rely to yourself in situations that feel uncomfortable. That's the purpose of self-reliance. So reaching the end of the video, just consider that you can respond from acceptance. You can respond to circumstances and people from acceptance, and this is or might be better than trying to escape from the worst case scenario that you're not willing to face. So what if you could accept the worst case prior so that you can then empower yourself into responding from a higher state of consciousness? And with that being said, I want you to answer that question, my friend. Let me know, why not let it go if you can't control it? What answer have you reached and have you found for yourself? Let me know in the comments. I would love to be with you in that insightful and thought-provoking experience. I would love to know what you have acquired, got out of this video, and let's make a discussion. So if you can take 1 minute or so to write a comment, I would highly appreciate it. This was my purpose. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're new to the channel, subscribe to Higher Consciousness with Danny, where I'll expand your awareness and trick you into living life of higher consciousness. If you relate with that, I would love to see you around. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy your day, my friend.